Thank you for joining me as we explore the origins of Congress. For the United States founders, creating the National Congress was a crucially important task. Fearful of a powerful executive, but having endured the problems stemming from the weak national government under the Articles of Confederation, the framers of the Constitution believed that the legislature should be the key branch of the newly formed national government. In their vision, the Congress would be the institution responsible for making laws that would create effective public policy. In structuring the Congress, the framers strove to create a legislative branch that was at once powerful enough to govern and to check the power of the president, and yet not so powerful that the legislature itself would exercise tyrannical rule. As they debated the shape of the Congress, the Constitution's framers had to balance the desires of representation of two opposing groups. The Constitution created a bicameral, or two-house legislature, in which one house, the House of Representatives, would be based on population, and the other chamber, the Senate, would be based on state representation. The constitutionally specified duties of each House of Congress reflected the framers' views of the essential nature of the two chambers and the people who would serve them. The House of Representatives, with the smallest constituencies of any federal office, currently about 647,000 people reside in each congressional district, is the chamber closer to the people. As such, the framers intended the House to closely represent the people's views. The Constitution thus requires, for example, that all revenue bills that would impose taxes, must originate in the House of Representatives. In the framers' eyes, unwarranted taxation was an egregious offense. By placing the power to tax in the hands of the members of the House of Representatives, the officials who face more frequent federal elections, the framers sought to avoid the types of unpopular, unfair taxes that had sparked the American Revolution. A short electoral cycle, they reasoned, would allow disfavored politicians to be voted out of office. Like all other bills, revenue bills must be passed in identical form by both the House and the Senate to become law. But requiring revenue bills to originate in the House reflected a victory by the large states at the Constitutional Convention. Smaller states wanted taxation power to reside within the Senate, of course. Although the framers viewed the House as the people's chamber, they conceived the Senate to be a more elite, more deliberate institution, one not subject to the whims of mass politics like its lower house counterpart. Today, because of its smaller size and because its members face elections less frequently than House members, the Senate remains a more deliberative body than the House. In addition, because of the specific constitutional duties mandated to the upper house, particularly the requirement that treaties must be ratified in the Senate, many U.S. senators have specialized in U.S. foreign policy issues. The framers' vision was to structure the Congress to embody Republican principles, ensuring that in its central policy-making responsibilities, the national legislature would be responsive to the needs and the will of the people, both historically and continuing in the present day. Civically engaged citizens have exerted a strong influence on the outcome of the policy-making process. One important avenue by which individuals influence Congress and its acts is through congressional elections, a topic we will now consider. The timetable for congressional elections reflects the framers' view of the differing nature of the House and the Senate. House members, as public servants in the legislative body that the framers conceived as closer to the people, are elected every 2 years in even-numbered years, 2010, 2012, and so on. But the framers also sought to check the power of the people, who they believed could be irrational and unruly, and so members of the Senate originally were chosen by the state legislators. Ratification of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution in 1913 shifted the election of senators to popular election within the states. Senators serve 6-year terms, which are staggered so that 1/3 of the Senate is elected every 2 years. Thus, in any given congressional election year, 33 or 34 members of the Senate are up for election. Usually, the 2 senators from a given state will not be elected in the same cycle unless the death or resignation of a sitting senator requires a special election. As we saw in earlier chapters, the Constitution requires that the number of seats in the House of Representatives awarded to each state be based on the state's population and that each state have 2 U.S. senators. On average, a successful campaign for a seat in the House of Representatives costs about $1.1 million in 2008. That is a veritable bargain compared with the price tag for a successful bid for the U.S. Senate, which averaged about $5.6 million that same year. Compare this with the annual salary of $174,000 that rank-and-file members of the House and Senate collect. The status of already holding office, known as incumbency, strongly influences a candidate's ability to raise money and is probably the most important factor in determining success in a congressional campaign. Indeed, any election year, about 95% of incumbent members of the House of Representatives running for re-election win, and about 93% of their Senate counterparts do. These outcomes may indicate what individual members of Congress are doing right, representing their own constituencies effectively, engaging with their constituents, and listening to and addressing their needs. But voters typically think about Congress in terms of a whole, rather than individuals, viewing it as a body that is overwhelmingly composed of other people's representatives who do not reflect their views. Thus, the voting public frequently attacks Congress as a collective entity. So why do incumbents so often win re-election? Several factors make it more likely that someone already in office will be returned to that office in a re-election bid. The first one is stronger name recognition. Having run for election before and served in government, incumbents tend to be better known than challengers. Easier access to media coverage. Media outlets routinely publicize the activities of elected congressional officials, rationalizing that they are covering the institution of Congress rather than the individuals. Non-incumbent challengers face an uphill battle in trying to get coverage of their campaigns. The franking privilege. The privilege of sending mail free of charge is known as franking. Federal law allows members of Congress free mailings to every household in their state or congressional district. These mailings make it easier for members of Congress to stay in touch with their constituencies throughout their tenure in office. Campaign contributions. Political action committees and individuals are interested in supporting candidates who will be in a position to help them once the election is over. Because donors are aware of the high re-election rates of incumbent candidates, incumbents garner an enormous proportion of contributions, sometimes as much as 80% in any given congressional election year. Lastly is casework. When an incumbent personally helps constituents solve problems with the federal bureaucracy, the resulting loyalty and good word-of-mouth reputation helps to attract support for that candidate during a run for re-election. Thus, incumbency is a powerful obstacle for outsiders who seek to unseat an elected member of Congress. Despite the incumbency advantage, in each congressional election, many individuals challenge incumbent members of Congress, often doing so knowing that the odds are stacked against them, but believing in giving voters a ballot choice. Others run because they seek to bring attention to a particular issue or to shape the policy agenda, or sometimes because they simply underestimate the power of incumbency. Reapportionment and redistricting. Sometimes the advantages of incumbency can be diminished, as in election years after reapportionment and redistricting. Reapportionment is the reallocation of seats in the House of Representatives on the basis of changes in the state's population since the last census. Every 10 years, in the year ending in 0, 2000, 2010, 2020, and so on, the federal government counts the number of people in the country as a whole. If the census indicates that a state's population has changed significantly, that state may gain or lose seats in the House of Representatives, as the state of New York has been doing, constantly losing. Redistricting, the redrawing of congressional district boundaries, is within a state, is based on the reapportionment from the census. Because the composition of a given congressional district can change as a result of reapportionment and redistricting, this process can mitigate the impact of incumbency. Frequently, the greatest shifts in the composition of the House of Representatives occur in election years ending in 2002, 2012, 2022, and so on. When the first elections take place that incorporate the changes from reapportionment and redistricting. As a result of reapportionment in 2012, for example, New York and Pennsylvania each lost 2 House seats. 5 states in the Midwest lost 1 House seat each, while several states in the South and Southwest gained seats. Reapportionment and redistricting following the 2010 census does not occur until 2012. But on the basis of U.S. Census Bureau projections, demographers have projected that Texas will probably gain the largest number of House seats, perhaps as many as 4, while Arizona and Florida could each gain 2 additional seats. Other states whose congressional delegations may increase in size include Georgia, Nevada, South Carolina, and Utah, which probably will gain 1 seat each. States whose slow population growth may mean the loss of 1 seat include Illinois, Iowa, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, while Ohio could lose 2 representatives. When a state loses a seat, the result is that an incumbent member of Congress is likely to lose a seat. When a state gains a seat, a new member of Congress can be elected to that open seat. The court case that is most closely associated with redistricting is Baker versus Carr, and that's C-A-R-R, in 1962. And this was a landmark United States Supreme Court case that retreated from the court's political question doctrine, deciding that redistricting, or attempts to change the way voting districts are delineated, issues present justifiable questions, thus enabling federal courts to intervene in and decide redistricting cases. The defendants unsuccessfully argued that redistricting of legislative districts is a political question, and hence not a question that may be resolved by federal courts. Political questions are ones that should be dealt with by Congress. And the one thing you need to remember about Baker versus Carr is it basically means one man, one vote. Most forms of gerrymandering are illegal. Let me back up. In some states, the goal of congressional redistricting is to protect House incumbents. The redrawing of congressional boundaries for the purpose of political advantage is a form of gerrymandering, the practice of drawing legislative district boundaries to benefit an incumbent, a political party, or some other group. The term was coined in reference to Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry after a district shaped like a salamander was created to favor his party in 1811. That's what the picture is on the left. And on the right, there's a picture of our district. Most forms of gerrymandering are illegal, or are legal, excuse me. So let me repeat that. Most forms of gerrymandering are legal. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Davis versus Bandemer in 1986 that a gerrymandering plan is unconstitutional only when it eliminates the minority party's influence statewide. Because of the strict standards, only one partisan gerrymandering plan filed after the 1990 census was successfully challenged. The court case that is most closely associated to gerrymandering is Shaw versus Reno in 1993, and this was a United States Supreme Court case that was argued in April of that year. The ruling was significant in the area of redistricting and racial gerrymandering. The court ruled in a 5-4 decision that redistricting based on race must be held to a standard of strict scrutiny under the Equal Protection Clause. On the other hand, bodies doing redistricting must be conscious of race to the extent that they must ensure compliance with the Voting Rights Act. The redistricting that occurred after the 2000 census was the first nationwide redistricting to apply the results of Shaw versus Reno. State legislatures have attempted to address the issue of racial imbalance in the House of Representatives by constructing a kind of gerrymander called a majority-minority district. A majority-minority district is composed of a majority of a given minority community, say African Americans, and the creator's intent is to make it likely that a member of that minority will be elected to Congress. The Supreme Court has ruled that such racial gerrymandering is illegal unless the state legislature redrawing the district lines creates majority and minority districts at the expense of other redistricting concerns. Typically, those concerns include preserving the geographic continuity of districts, keeping communities within one legislative district, and re-electing incumbents.